Greetings and welcome back to the Casual Wargamer. You join me once again on a very cold and chilly night. I'm once again supping some hot chocolate in order to keep me from turning into a frosticle. And today we're going to talk about why it's always a city fight board. Why is it always ruins? Why do you never see trees on a battlefield? This is something that comes up relatively often, I find, in some discussions on social media and on various forums and the like. And it's kind of true. Every time you look at a battle report, or most battle reports, I won't say every time, but the majority of battle reports and pretty much every tournament game I've ever seen, it's always a table dominated by ruins and buildings and impassable things, but never trees. And it's interesting because back in 3rd edition and 4th edition, the rulebook would show some colour photos of table setups. And in at least those 2 editions, there was, amongst the traditional ruins and what have you, there was always a jungle board where there'd be maybe 2 sort of Imperial Shield generator style buildings and a load of trees. Big blobs of trees and small blobs of trees and a river running through it. And now you just don't see it. And I think there are a couple of reasons for this. The first I'm going to call immersion. Unless you're watching sort of like a Vietnam movie where it's all pretty much jungle, or Desert Rat's North Africa campaign sort of movie or documentary, everything is pretty much in an urban environment. 2 of my favourite sort of, I'm going to say, war movies are Enemy at the Gates and Black Hawk Down. Both of these are heavily urban conflict areas. Enemy at the Gate, if you don't know it, is a World War II film starring Jude Law as Vasily Zaitsev. I think I'm pronouncing that name wrong, but there you go. Who was historically a famous Russian sniper during the Second World War against the Germans. And the film is set in Stalingrad, primarily. And the film shows this awesome layout of a ruined city that's been bombed and shelled to oblivion. And it looks like what we see in city fight boards of Warhammer 40k. And I think there's a certain immersion to that people like. I think you can, even if you're not a narrative player like myself or a casual player, I think even as a competitive player who looks at the game from a mechanical basis, there's still something that's much more interesting about having these ruins and these dilapidated buildings and so on than there is fighting over a bunch of trees. I think the immersion, especially when you think that a lot of 40k showcases either barren wastelands or hive cities. And I think that's a big thing about it. People put down ruins and things because it looks more what they expect. My second thing is tradition. I think this is what we've always done. It's always been ruins. In 4th edition, Games Workshop released a book called City Fight, which was a narrative style supplement which gave you rules for fighting on tables. It was predominantly and very heavily decorated with ruins and buildings and the like. And although it wasn't the best source book, it did have some interesting missions and it did set up what we now have as stratagems, nearly 20 years later. And although it wasn't, as I say, the best source book, I think that for those of us that go back that far, it was very much a driving force. After I did notice after that, you pretty much always saw city fight boards. And I think when you have a player who's been in the game this long and you introduce new players to it, the first thing you do is you set up a city fight board. So newer players come in thinking that's the norm. They will set up city fight boards. When they get good at the game and they teach other people, it will be a city fight board. This is what I call tradition. I think it's the way it's done now. It's very visual as well, I think. When you bring someone into a game, either to teach them or someone wants to watch the game and see how it plays, having a series of ruined buildings and the like, it sort of sparks that, oh, okay, this is interesting, more than a bunch of trees. And I think, that sort of ties immersion and tradition together. The other thing is the rules. Have you ever looked up how trees and woodland are actually utilised in a game of Warhammer 40k 10th edition? For all intents and purposes, you can boil it down to, you can shoot in to an area of woodland, you can shoot out of an area of woodland. If models are within the woodland, they get cover save. You can't see through or over, unless obviously, indirect fire, you can't see through or over woodland. So basically what Games Workshop is saying is woodlands are ruins. They're just green and barky. So why bother with trees? Why not have ruins which look better and make for a much more interesting looking table? And I think that's the problem. I think if things like woodlands were done differently, you might see a few more bits on a table, but overall, I think because they're ruins, effectively by the rules, you may as well just place ruins on the table and have a much more interesting looking table. And so because of that, Warhammer 40k is pretty much destined to always be fought on a city fight board, 9 times out of 10. And I don't think that's going to change. Games Workshop aren't great with their terrain rules anyway, and it just makes it a lot easier to use what you know. And the same applies to tournaments. It looks better, the immersion, and the rules are simple and straightforward. That's why I think you pretty much only ever see city fight boards. But what are your thoughts? Do you still play on a jungle table or terrain setup? I think it's very thematic if you're playing Catachan, for example. I find it very unimmersive to see them running around on a city fight board in the few times that you see Catachans. Anyway, let me know what you think. If you play a woodland, swamp, jungle table, how do you handle it? And how do you find it any different, if there is such a thing, to playing on a regular game? A regular board layout. Let me know down below. I would certainly be interested. Have you ever seen a tournament table set up as being jungle rather than urban? Anyway, just my little thoughts. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give me a thumbs up. It would be really helpful. Hit the subscribe button and share the video. And I look forward to seeing your comments down below. Until next time, everybody, take care. Good gaming. Stay warm.